Hey everyone, it's Scott Rustroltz here for the June 20th edition of the Listen and Learn podcast. As always, thanks for tuning in. And if you do enjoy the podcast, I encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and share with your friends and family. And in the coming days, hopefully tomorrow, but potentially Thursday, we're going to have some new ways for you to listen to the podcast that hopefully is in a little bit more of a user-friendly fashion. So as we have those details, we'll unveil them to you, but something to look forward to later this week. Today, I want to focus on a couple stories. We're not going to talk about the Georgia 6 special election today because results are just coming in now as we're doing this. We talked a little bit about it yesterday if you want to re-listen to that. And then tomorrow, when we have the actual results in hand, it seems like a pretty 50-50 race, famous last words. We'll talk about those and what the potential implications are of that. But today, we want to talk about things that have actually happened that we can add some value in. First, in Brussels today, you had a foiled terrorist attack. A person had an explosive belt, it appears, based on the reports, in the Brussels train station. Fortunately, police were able to take him down, and he is dead now, before he was able to inflict harm on anyone else. It's a near miss, and that's great news. According to reports, he did say Allah Akbar prior to being killed. We do know that from the Paris attack back in 2015, if you remember, and it's well known in intelligence communities that Brussels has a bit more of a radical Islamic problem, particularly in the Molenbeek section, than the rest of Europe as a whole, and has kind of been the hotbed of a lot of these problems. A couple of things, I think, first we have to say we're very fortunate that this was thwarted before anyone got hurt. But at the end of the day, the best way to thwart a terrorist attack is to keep the terrorists out in the first place. And that's the lesson that Europe has learned and after letting 1 million people in without really doing any vetting. And that's when you have to say, thank God that we have an Atlantic and a Pacific Ocean that ensure that that could not happen to us. But, Europe's kind of stuck. They're already there, given the system in which you can move within Europe without you needing a passport. It's very difficult to keep track of people, and we cannot repeat that mistake, which is why, to many like myself, it's frustrating to have seen the courts block a 90-day suspension of travel of individuals who come from terror-ridden countries into this country, by the way, the 90 days that it was all the executive order said would already be over. We would already have the vetting procedures in place and we'll have moved on. But at the end of the day, it should be harder for someone from a terrorist country to get into the United States than it is for an American to successfully get a 30-year mortgage. And right now, it arguably is not the case. And I think that's a pretty decent litmus test for what our future immigration policies ought to be. And also something interesting is how this generated so few headlines. And I'm not speaking to media bias. What instead I'm saying is we've kind of gotten numb to this. It seems like we talked about yesterday. It seems like almost every day there's some kind of terrorist incident, particularly in Europe, and we're getting numb to it. And we cannot allow ourselves to get numb because when you do that, you're acquiescing and accepting this as a fact of life. And we in the Western world cannot accept car van attacks, suicide attacks as anything near normal, and instead we need to forcefully force it out of our society and say this is something completely not going to accept and take the fight instead to the radical Islamists in the Middle East. But, I'm very fortunate to say no one got hurt today there. Second, following up yesterday's story on North Korea, today the president tweeted out, and I'm quoting, "While I greatly appreciate the efforts of President Xi and China to help with North Korea, it has not worked out. At least I know China tried." And I think the murder, and that's what it was, the murder apparently of Otto Warmbier by the brutal North Korean regime, just highlighting how evil that country is. And the president has given China some time. It's more their problem. They have more control, certainly, over Kim than we do, to try and get something in line. And today the president was expressing an end of patience for that. So there's two ways I see this. One is he's trying to send a signal to China that they have to do something imminently here, otherwise the U.S. will act, and it's one way to try and exert a last bit of public pressure. The other is the president has completely exhausted his patience and is going to do something. Now, what could you do? A military strike has to be weighed very carefully because the North Korean regime does have the ability to counterattack in South Korea or in Japan, where you could inflict heavy civilian losses. So that has to be done with great caution, and I'm not quite sure we're there yet. Instead, what I think you have to continue to do is increase sanctions. particularly, and we mentioned this briefly yesterday, second round sanctions. So start sanctioning companies that do business with the North Koreans. And that would hit a lot of Chinese companies. And if you basically said to a Chinese company that you lose access to America, and our market, the biggest market in the world, if you do any business with the North Koreans, that could be a way of really exerting some pressure on China to pull the last levers they have to either force them out of power and put someone in place who, while still probably pursuing a brutal dictatorship, is not going to pursue nuclear weapons and will be far better for us, or force a broader regime change. But that has to be one measure considered. I think I'd also like to highlight that Russia has actually done more trade with North Korea in recent months than they had been in recent years. So this is another sign of Putin being a bad actor, and we need to tell the Russians that that is completely unacceptable behavior. Plus, Kim getting a nuclear weapon really does run contrary to their own interests. You just don't want madmen having nuclear weapons. That's not good for any of the great powers. So we need to start exerting some pressure on Putin, and that kind of behavior is unacceptable. But this North Korea situation is ramping up. Not sure what the end game is, but it feels like we could be nearing a point where something climactic is going to happen. And given how many powers are clustered in that region, could be of quite significance. So we'll keep you up to date. Third, turning domestically, looks like we will see the healthcare bill on Thursday. No one has seen the bill yet, so we can only speculate on what's in it, and I don't want to go into too much detail on that. Obviously, the process by which this is done is suboptimal. I think it's hard to defend it as optimal. Admittedly, there's probably no bill the Republicans could have written that a Democrat would have supported, so I can understand why they felt that committee hearings would have been just for show. But going forward, all else equal, would we rather the legislative process happen fully in the open versus in the dark? We prefer it to be in the open. That said, if the bill is going to be better than the current Obamacare status quo, you still should support it, even if the process was suboptimal. My guess would continue to be that the Senate will postpone some of the tax cuts versus the House, use those savings to expand the time by which the Medicaid expansion will remain in place, probably by about 2 years, but we'll keep the work requirements in Medicaid for states that want to adopt them. As well, they'll probably increase subsidies for those over the age of 40 versus the House plan, which was my biggest criticism by the House plan, if you remember that. And the big thing I'm hoping is that they still continue to provide ways for insurers to offer slimmer insurance packages for people who want that, i.e. someone like myself who does not want maternity leave covered, as I'm very unlikely to use that. That is something that can help lower premiums, and I hope the Senate keeps that. As a quick reminder, we just want to flash this in front of you. These are the senators to watch on Thursday and in next week, because they'll probably vote within a week, of who are the votes that are at risk. On the conservative side, you have Paul and Lee. On the more moderate side, Collins, Murkowski, Heller, and then you have some of the Medicaid expanders in the middle. So depending on, you can only lose 2 of these. So listen to what they say. If you're seeing enough of these on board, bill will pass. If 3 oppose it, bill will fail. So that's kind of a cheat guide to what's going to happen there. And finally, we want to mention this. It's kind of a longer wave story, and that's involving Caterpillar. We talk a bit about the economy, and this is just kind of a bit of economic optimism I wanted to share with you. What you're seeing here is Caterpillar sales year over year. And you can see around the world they've improved, and in North America they've gone from down 14% year over year in December to up 2% in May. So steady improvement. You see resources was still down 3% last month, but construction was up 4% year over year. So this is perhaps a sign that businesses are actually making good on their statements that they plan on increasing capital expenditures, because obviously buying heavy machinery for someone like Caterpillar portends capital spending in the future and more investment that should be accretive for the U.S. economy. It's incredibly important, though, that we get some kind of tax cut, tax reform package done this year to continue to incentivize investment to grow. Because if we want to get the U.S. economy back towards 2%, from 2% towards 3%, that means we need to get more corporate and small business investment. This is a sign that it's starting to improve. And 2% is a lot better than negative 14%, but still not quite where it should be, which is in the mid-single digits, hopefully. But a positive sign, nonetheless, on the U.S. economy today that portends better future growth in the months ahead. So that's it for today. As always, thank you for listening, and we'll check in with you tomorrow.